Though China, by Western standards, is still a very poor country, her mastery of modern technology and her industrial development have been far more rapid than most people ever expected. Now, if you were to ask a Chinese how this was done, the chances are that he would reply with two simple words: self-reliance. These words are a kind of shorthand covering a whole complex of ideas. They mean, for one thing, that China was determined not to become dependent on outside help. She paid off her indebtedness to the Soviet Union in 1965, and since then she's been going ahead under her own steam without any foreign aid or foreign investments. But self-reliance means much more than that. Every province, every city, every village is encouraged as far as it can to make what it needs for itself. As a result, there is now a truck factory in every one of China's provinces. Automobiles are made, I think, in 30 or more cities. Peasants in their villages build their own small hospitals. Even the army, as far as possible, grows its own food and makes its own medicines. China, in other words, has become a vast, do-it-yourself country.
For a nation to be self-reliant, it must first be able to feed itself. The disastrous food shortages in 1961-62 were an indication that agriculture had been neglected, and from then on large capital funds were made available for agricultural development. China, as a result, enjoyed 10 consecutive years of good harvests. With the grain share stockpile, the country has now passed the stage of improvisation from harvest to harvest. She still imports wheat, but exports large quantities of rice to over 20 countries. And the money she receives for rice is more than the cost of imported wheat. China has, in fact, become a net exporter of food. Conservation of natural resources is another necessity if a nation is to be self-reliant. Among the first acts of the new government was the institution of a huge reforestation program. Most of the logging is done in the far north, and for each tree felled, many others are planted. This backyard electric steel furnace in a small town in Yunnan province is an example of local self-reliance. It may not be economically efficient to produce steel in such small quantities, but this kind of efficiency is not the criterion the Chinese apply. They want to avoid what has happened in other developing countries, where the concentration of all advanced technology in a few major centers has left the vast mass of the peasant population quite untouched. This building in Sumo, a small town in the south, was until recently a workshop for repairing small tractors. The engineers working here, both men and women, decided that they could make their own tractors instead of buying them from the state. The authorities encouraged them to go ahead and provided them with the necessary tools. Learn to do something by doing it is another general slogan. And these young people told me that they made all kinds of mistakes before turning out usable machines. They are now supplying tractors to several nearby communes. This story is typical of thousands of local enterprises that have sprung up throughout the rural areas of China. By including the rural population in production, China is hoping gradually to lessen the great social differences between life in the cities and the life of the peasants in the country. But if China is to be nationally self-reliant, she must also develop her heavy industries. China has 8 large steel plants, but relative to the country's needs, the national output is still far too small. China today produces all her present requirements of oil. This is one of China's medium-sized refineries. Fully automated, it was designed and built by Chinese engineers. China is the biggest producer and the biggest exporter of textiles in the world. Automobiles are made in many cities, but the total production is small. China relies on public transport and the bicycle. Her economy is not yet capable of large-scale car production, but having seen the problems that automobiles have brought to Western societies, she has, as a matter of state policy, determined never to become a car culture. How do China's industrial workers live? This is the Cheng family. The father and mother both work at a factory in Peking that makes China's version of a Jeep. They are a typical family, except for the fact that they have no older relatives still living. The boy, Cheng Paozhou, is 14. His sister, Cheng Xiaofen, is 10. The family lives in an apartment consisting of 2 rather small rooms, a simple kitchen, bathroom, and toilet. Mr. and Mrs. Cheng's combined monthly income is a little over $40 a month. Their expenses are small. They pay only $2 a month rent, and this includes heating, gas, electricity, and water. They pay no taxes, and all medical expenses are covered by the factory. The family leaves shortly before 7 in the morning. Mr. and Mrs. Cheng to the factory, the children to school. The children's school is just 10 minutes' walk. The factory is within easy bicycling distance. Special factory buses bring workers living farther away. This is one of 15 factories in China that makes this kind of vehicle. Like a Jeep, it has 4-wheel drive. The factory is a complete production plant, turning out engine, chassis, and body. The factory works on 2 8-hour shifts. Mr. Cheng is a machinist. As part of the policy of self-reliance, workers on the assembly line are urged to use their own initiative and suggest any improvements that they think might help production. Mr. Cheng and 2 others are working out an improved design of a lathe. Mrs. Cheng works in another section of the factory. While in China, we drove hundreds of miles in this kind of vehicle, sometimes over very rough mountain roads. They're extremely sturdy in construction. They're somewhat hard on the springs. Finished vehicles being driven onto flatbed railroad cars. This factory is one of the smaller factories making this type of vehicle. It turns out around 10,000 a year. The food in the factories I visited has improved enormously since I was last in China. Workers are given a great variety of dishes to choose from. The cost of a good meal is around 12 cents, and this would include one meat dish. During vacations, the Cheng's 2 children can eat with their parents in this factory canteen. Otherwise, they have their midday meal at school. Many industrial workers live in new residential areas, such as this one not far from Shanghai. It houses 4,000 families, most of whom came from the slum areas of Shanghai when they were being cleared. It is a complete community, with shopping center, hospital, restaurant, and kindergartens and schools for the 7,000 children who live here. This housing development is administered by a committee entirely composed of women. They were elected by the residents. At this meeting, they were making plans for a Sunday outing for the residents. Among their many other duties, this committee is responsible for setting up volunteer workshops where women who want to work part-time, perhaps while their children are at school, can earn some extra money. Among the 10 or 12 workshops set up by the committee is this toy factory. The toy shops in Shanghai were calling for larger supplies, and the committee thought it was something that the women residents would enjoy doing. Making toys might at first sight seem a rather unimportant contribution to China's national economy. But taken together, there must be tens of thousands of them, their total output is not insignificant. These volunteer neighborhood workshops have not only been set up in the new housing developments, one finds them down many small streets in every city. Some of them produce quite simple things, such as this one, where women are making wooden boxes. Though there are now tens of thousands of neighborhood workshops, their importance is perhaps more social than economic. They enable housewives to take part in production and thus to feel identified with the country's overall effort. These workshops also help to bridge the gap between primitive handcraft and modern technology. I realized the full meaning of the words self-reliance when I found housewives in one neighborhood workshop actually making integrated circuits used in computers. In the West, this sophisticated work can only be seen in a few advanced laboratories. Circuits so small that they are almost invisible to the naked eye must be photographically etched onto a tiny plate, and minute hair-like wires must then be welded to appropriate points in the circuits. Nothing I saw symbolized for me more vividly what is happening in China than these middle-aged housewives taking part in advanced technology. This is China's legacy from the past, the pollution of the air over one of her old industrial cities in the northeast. In the past few years, the Chinese government has become conscious of the problem of pollution, and its policy today is to build an anti-pollution system as an integral part of any new factory. A good example is this factory producing vinyl, a synthetic fiber. "70 tons of fiber are produced here daily, and 6,000 tons of water, highly contaminated with sulfuric acid and formaldehyde, pour out of the factory every day. If untreated, the water would have eliminated all aquatic life. It would have been unusable for irrigation and would have endangered human life as well. An elaborate water purification system was therefore built simultaneously with the factory itself. The water is continuously tested, and its purity is kept well above minimum international standards. A sugar refinery in Kwantung province is also doing something about pollution. Thousands of tons of sugarcane arrive at this factory every day. Refined sugar is the principal product. Dense smoke used to pour from the factory's chimney. The workers at a meeting decided to do something about it. They blocked the chimney and deflected the smoke through chambers in which the smoke particles were mixed with water, which was then evaporated. They said it was a very expensive way of dealing with the problem, and they would have to think up something better. But meanwhile, they were collecting every day between 8 and 10 tons of sludge, which formerly went into the sky as smoke. They found that the sludge, when dried and mixed with other ingredients, could form a kind of cement. Another example of recycling what was once wasteful is the use they are now making of the huge amounts of sugarcane pulp that were formerly just dumped into the sea. Now they compress the pulp, bale it, and stack it in these strange pyramid piles. As in other sugar-producing countries, the pulp is now used for a whole variety of products. Altogether, 30 different byproducts are now made from what used to be thrown away. Paper is one of them. Brewer's yeast is another byproduct. And polycrystal silicon used in electronic apparatus. Even the cinders from the coal burnt in the factory furnaces are made into something useful. They're first ground and then compressed into building blocks. Shanghai, China's largest and busiest port. Though the Chinese now trade with 107 countries, her overseas commerce represents only a very small fraction of her gross national product. I was surprised to see the great variety of things China now exports, like this frozen pork, which is going to, of all countries, Denmark. China does not equate self-reliance with self-sufficiency, and she's ready to develop her foreign trade on the basis of national independence. These are Chinese-made freighters. A few years ago, China had to buy or charter all her ships from foreign countries. Now she is making an increasing number of her own, some quite large, of 10 or even 15,000 tons displacement. The foreman who took me around the shipyard told me that the average construction time of a 5,000-ton freighter was 90 days, from laying the keel to launching. This is not as fast, he said, as the Japanese. To the Chinese people, the construction of their own ships represents an important new step. They are an indication of China's growing independence and commercial strength. But even more important, they symbolize China's readiness to move outwards and take her place once more as one of the great nations of the world.